Given that it's our children's Sabbath celebration, I could preach a sermon recruiting you to be volunteers with our wonderful children and youth ministries, but I'm not going to. But if you decide you want to help out with our children's and youth ministries, I'm not going to stop you. This morning, I want to preach a sermon about one thing: when the storm roars. So first, I need to teach you a song. Would you please stand up? And if you were watching online, please step back from your computer, stand up as well, and here we go. So the first part goes like this. I'll teach it to you, then we'll try it. So I'll do it once, and then you echo it back. When the storm roars, when the storm roars, when the storm roars all around. Hey! When the storm roars, when the storm roars, when the storm roars all around. We do that twice, and then we sing this. I am weak, but you are strong. By God's grace we move along. I am weak, but you are strong. By God's grace we move along. And then we do the first thing again. Here we go, all together. When the storm roars, when the storm roars, when the storm roars all around. Hey! When the storm roars, when the storm roars, when the storm roars all around. Hey! I am weak, but you are strong. By God's grace we move along. When the storm roars, when the storm roars, when the storm roars all around. Hey! Sometimes in life there are these storms that are just so huge, they seem overwhelming. Let's do a really, really big storm. When the storm roars, when the storm roars, when the storm roars all around. Hey! When the storm roars, when the storm roars, when the storm roars all around. Hey! I am weak, but you are strong. By God's grace we move along. When the storm roars, when the storm roars, when the storm roars all around. Hey! Okay, one more before we're done, because sometimes in life there's just storms that are so itty-bitty and tiny. When the storm roars, when the storm roars, when the storm roars all around. Hey! When the storm roars, when the storm roars, when the storm roars all around. Hey! I am weak, but you are strong. By God's grace we move along. When the storm roars, when the storm roars, when the storm roars all around. Hey! Wonderful. Well done. Give yourselves a hand. You may have a seat. The parable we heard today is about a storm that is roaring in the life of this widow. The widow in the text we read is faced by this unnamed opponent, and she is seeking justice. She goes to the judge, and time after time she goes to the judge, which is our first indication that something's gone wrong, because she's going to the judge as opposed to the judge looking out for her. And the text even calls this judge an unjust judge. And I'm pretty much convinced the qualifications for being a judge are to be just. The widow goes time and time again. You could say she's the Energizer Bunny of widows because she just keeps going and going and going until finally she wears this judge down. Now, the word wear him down, if you translate the Greek, which I'm sure you all do on your free time, it translates to something to the effect of give a black eye. So this widow who has been defeated by the storms around her isn't defeated. She persists and she keeps going and she cries out, "Grant me justice." Sometimes we are the widow. The storms roar all around and we cry out, "Grant me justice." And I think if we're honest, sometimes we're the judge who hears the person and the people around us and we just ignore it. There's another story in our scriptures that talks about hearing the cry. In the book of Exodus, we are introduced to a character named Charlton Heston. I mean Moses. But I'm pretty much convinced that Moses looked a lot like Charlton Heston circa 1956. Exodus chapter 1, we see God's people, slaves in Egypt. Exodus chapter 2, we see this man named Moses, born from the slave family, but raised as a prince of Egypt. Exodus chapter 3, we see Moses running for his life, leaving his slave family and his royal family behind, and he's out in the desert. And it's here in the desert that he encounters a fire hazard, this bush that is burning but won't go out. And it's in this bush that is burning that won't go out that he encounters the divine. He finds God in the midst of that desert place. And God tells him, I have heard the cry of my people in slavery, and I will do something about it. Because you see, the unjust judge finally got around to doing something. And if even the unjust judge finally gets around to doing something, how much more quickly will God hear the cry? So God tells Moses, I have heard their cry, and I'm going to do something. And so what God does is God sends Moses. God hears every cry, and God sends us. Grant me justice. Where do we hear these cries for justice in our world today? On October 9th, 2012, a 15-year-old, her cry was heard by the Pakistani Taliban, and they sent a masked gunman to her bus to silence her cry. Her cry was for the need for education for everyone. And so this masked gunman boards this school bus and says, which one of you is Malala? Speak up, otherwise I will shoot you all. She spoke up. And their assassination attempt could not stop her cry, and she continues to speak up and speak out against oppression and for the need for education everywhere. May we continue to hear the cries of the young girls in Pakistan who are fearful for their lives when they go to school, and for their communities that are plagued by Taliban violence and Western drones. Or maybe you hear the silent cry on the subway platforms when you see a poster for a boy named Avante, a 14-year-old autistic boy from Queens who has been missing for the past 2 weeks. May God grant Avante justice. May God grant Avante's family justice. We hear the sigh of relief from families across the country as a government restarts after a 16-day shutdown. But this sigh of relief does not mask the cry in adults and children as the problems that led to this shutdown still persist. God, grant us justice. How many children wake up hungry, go to bed hungry? How many children must fall victim to another round of gun violence? How many children face bullying and are singled out and oppressed in their day-to-day life at school and, God forbid, at home? Sometimes the cry of the oppressed is the growl of an empty stomach. Sometimes the cry of the oppressed is the echo of a gunshot. And sometimes the cry of the oppressed is the sigh of a child who is lonely and overlooked. God, grant us justice. Justice is not simply a judicial verdict. It's not something that just happens in a courtroom. But when we say justice and we talk theologically, we are talking about healing that which is broken, repairing that which is in need of being fixed. When we talk about justice, we are looking for any of the fractures and cracks in our lives and in our world, and we are saying, how is God calling us to fix them? The prophets throughout Scripture talked of justice, and they would often use the same phrase. In Isaiah chapter 2, in Joel chapter 3, in Micah chapter 4, you see the exact same phrase, turning swords into plowshares. This is a creative act of justice, turning swords into plowshares. Or, as a more contemporary prophet, the late Michael Jackson said in his song, Heal the World, he's a prophet. Create a world with no fear. Together we'll cry happy tears. See the nations turn their swords into plowshares. Heal the world. Make it a better place for you and for me and the entire human race. Swords into plowshares is a creative act of justice. I'm convinced that a ministry with children and youth is a creative act of justice. And on this, our Children's Sabbath, we celebrate children and youth and the young people in our church and in our world. A Sunday school and a youth ministry, it's not just some sort of, free or cheap babysitting. It's not just spiritual dry cleaning where you bring your kids dirty and pick them up pressed and clean. Sometimes they're even dirtier. Just children's ministry and just youth ministry is more than just another children's and youth ministry. It is a space that reaches out to those who are literally overlooked and pushed out. And it says, you belong here too. We will hear your cry, and we will know who you are. Adolescents in our world constantly live in two different levels. There is the level at which they are expected to perform, and then there's the world beneath at which they actually live. Over the past 2 decades, the expectations and pressure and stress on adolescents continues to rise, and the support continues to decrease. They face systemic abandonment in every way, shape, and form. And while all of this can make a creative act of justice sound intimidating, I want to propose that it's actually quite simple. But first, I'd like to tell you a story. Before I moved to New York, I worked at a church in West Michigan. If you're from West Michigan on the interwebs, it looks like a hand, and I lived over here. It's America's high five. And I worked at a church, and it was one of those big churches, so there was lots of people, and I never knew them all. There was about roughly 8,000 to 10,000 people total. It was big. And I was in charge of the ministry with our 5th and 6th graders, which was also pretty big. And one Sunday, the 5th and 6th graders were invited to help lead the music on a Sunday morning worship gathering. Now, we didn't have a John Del Cueto to lead a village chorus for children and youth. And we didn't even have the same kind of breathtaking, soul-melting choirs like we have here at Middle. The church I was at had more of like a Mumford & Sons post-Coldplay kind of a band. And so naturally, the 5th and 6th graders were invited to join by playing the recorder. Now, it is true that one of my greatest memories in my life as a pastor is leading worship at a church by playing the call to worship, Eye of the Tiger, on the recorder. So we're at rehearsal because we met for a few Saturdays leading up to this Sunday, and so I didn't have to lead this thing because I don't know how to do that. I just know how to make hopefully in-tune squeaks on a recorder. And I'm sitting here in the sea of about 100 5th and 6th graders, and we have a music director directing our rehearsal, and as 5th and 6th graders do, and maybe as I do, we're a little rambunctious and fidgety sometimes. The director asks us to quiet down. The kid next to me completely ignores her, or most likely just doesn't even know that she's talking because he's too into his fidgeting. And then she says it again, I need us all to quiet down. I'm pretty convinced she's just talking to him. So I look over and say, Kenyon, you've got to be quiet. Kenyon sits up straight. I didn't think it would work that easily. He looks to the person next to him. Jim knows my name. Jim knows my, there was about 100, 200, 300 5th and 6th graders, so I didn't know all of their names. Kenyon was like, Jim knows my name. What Kenyon didn't know is that I wasn't sure if it was Kenyon or Scott. And I often wonder what would have happened if I had chosen the wrong name. Sometimes knowing someone's name can be a creative act of justice. The widow in our text, we don't have a name. Imagine how much more we would know her if we knew her name. When you know the names of the people around you, you have the ability to love them and not the idea of them. Knowing someone's name allows us to bridge love and justice. This is why we have Sunday school teachers with the same groups of students every single week here at Middle Church, so they can know their names. This is why we have a village chorus of children and youth, where they can have spaces to sing and create, and someone will know their names. What would it look like for Middle Church to be a space where young people could come and discover this intersection of art and justice, this space that is a safe place for them where people can know their names? What would it look like for all of the brown and black boys from this church to be mentored by a brown or black boy from this community, someone who will know their name, who will journey with them, and who will pray with them, God grant this person justice? Can we be a place where we know people's names? Now, I said that this creative act of justice can be as simple is filling in a blank. In your bulletins, you should all have a little card that says, God, grant blank justice. And if you're watching online, just get a piece of paper and write the words, God, grant blank justice. And I want you to fill in this blank. Maybe it's the name of someone you know from this church. Maybe it's the name of one of these wonderful children you saw up here. Maybe it's a name like Malala or Avante. Or maybe, if you're honest, you just need to write 2 letters, and those letters are M-E. God, grant us justice. Because the storms that roar, they will keep on roaring. But when someone knows your name, when I am weak, you can be strong. Because by God's grace, we can move along. God, grant us justice from the storms that roar in our life and in our world. May we be a community that turns swords into plowshares. May we be a community that hears the cries around us. May we be a community that knows someone's name. Because when the storm roars, may God grant us justice. Amen.